Alain Janot, vous avez fait paraître ce petit livre, Échappée belle à travers nos églises. Ce n'est pas votre premier livre, vous avez déjà écrit, il faut le dire, et Letters to my kid. Alors, comment et quand avez-vous écrit ce livre?
J'ai commencé la rédaction de ce livre en janvier 2019. Donc, c'est une idée qui m'est venue parce que dans le passé, j'ai déjà écrit sur les églises. J'ai un vif intérêt pour ces édifices. J'ai écrit sur les églises dans le journal La Vie catholique où j'ai rédigé des textes sur les différentes églises dans les différentes contrées que je visite. Il faut souligner que je suis personnel navigant chez Mauritius et que j'ai l'occasion d'être exposé à des lieux de culte à l'étranger et j'ai saisi cette opportunité pour me documenter et pour partager avec mes compatriotes ces merveilles que je découvre régulièrement quand je voyage. Les 12 églises, eh ben, je les connaissais déjà, mais pour les besoins du livre, je suis reparti sur les lieux, me ressourcer, voir avec un nouveau regard et ensuite rédiger avec le cœur qu'il faut, trouver les mots justes et les émotions justes pour communiquer cet amour que j'ai pour les églises.
Qu'est-ce qu'il y a à voir dans une église? Il y a les objets du culte, mais encore, c'est un lieu chargé d'histoire.
Il y a une immensité de choses à voir et à ressentir. Il y a à voir avec les yeux, il y a aussi à voir avec le cœur. Si vous balayez vos yeux dans une église, vous verrez l'art sacré qui est là, où l'homme a désiré à travers cet art sacré, a désiré à travers le beau et exprimer l'immensité et la grandeur de Dieu, du Créateur. Il y a aussi les symboles qui nous rappellent que nous sommes dans une église, non seulement dans la maison de Dieu, mais dans la maison du peuple de Dieu. Donc il y a toute une panoplie de symboles qui nous invitent à goûter à cela, à entreprendre ce voyage vers le divin, vers l'indicible, mais aussi à prendre la mesure de comment une église est maison de Dieu. Évidemment, vous avez des choses à voir avec le cœur. Quand vous entrez dans une église, vous êtes enveloppé d'une grande sérénité, ou du moins, moi je le ressens ainsi, et mon entourage aussi, d'une grande sérénité, d'une présence indéniable, où vous pourrez vous ressourcer et voir avec le cœur la présence même de Dieu. Donc, dans une église, par exemple, vous avez un avant-goût du paradis. Nous prenons l'église, par exemple, de Saint-François d'Assise. C'est la plus vieille église de Maurice, inaugurée en 1756, mais c'est aussi le doyen des lieux de culte à Maurice. Et c'est toute l'histoire de Maurice qui est écrite là, dans l'église de Saint-François d'Assise. Quand vous entrez dans la cour, vous faites face à la représentation de Maë de la Bourdonnais, dont le nom a été donné à l'église Saint-François d'Assise parce qu'il est directement associé à la construction de cette église-là. Et la statue témoigne de ça. Et il y a aussi des vitraux, hein. Les vitraux magnifiques de Marcel Lagesse. Dans le chœur, vous avez des vitraux qui représentent l'Esprit Saint, qui représente l'Eucharistie. Dans la tribune, au haut de la tribune, vous avez un vitrail qui représente Jésus sur la croix.
Vous venez de nous parler de l'église Saint-François d'Assise, mais de toutes les églises décrites dans votre livre, laquelle préférez-vous personnellement?
Je les aime toutes, mais j'aurais un penchant quand même pour l'église Saint-Sacrement à Cassis. Elle est chargée d'histoire parce que elle est fastueuse, elle a une architecture exceptionnelle. L'on dit que c'est une reproduction, toute proportion gardée, de Notre-Dame de Paris. Et cette église, elle se trouve dans un faubourg de Port-Louis. Et vous pouvez vous demander cette inadéquation. Vous pouviez vous attendre à une telle église à se retrouver dans un lieu beaucoup plus riche. Mais l'histoire veut que Port-Louis fut à l'époque, les faubourgs que nous appelons les faubourgs aujourd'hui, furent à l'époque l'endroit où vivait la haute bourgeoisie. Et qu'à partir des épidémies de malaria, de choléra, toute cette haute bourgeoisie a migré vers les plaines Williams, vers les Hauts, et elle a laissé là l'église telle qu'elle est dans un faubourg pour les pauvres. C'est pour ça qu'on connaît cette église comme la cathédrale des pauvres. Quand vous entrez à l'intérieur, il y a une profusion de sculptures, il y a des ouvertures ogivales avec des vitraux, une rose magnifique devant. Ouvrez l'œil, regardez, et pour toutes ces raisons, pour sa beauté, pour son histoire, pour les leçons qu'elle comporte, j'ai un penchant quand même pour l'église Saint-Sacrement.
Comme vous l'avez dit, vous voyagez constamment. Alors, quelles sont les églises, mais également les temples, les mosquées, les pagodes que vous aimez visiter à l'étranger?
Ah, vous savez, il y en a tellement, hein, parce que ce sont, comme je vous dis, ce sont des lieux de ressourcement. Et comme souvent je suis seul quand je suis à l'étranger, et je vais très régulièrement et très souvent dans les églises, indépendamment de la confession, hein. Et je vais dans les églises anglicanes, je vais dans les églises catholiques. Et là où il n'y a pas d'église, j'irai bien dans un temple ou même une mosquée qui m'accorderait l'accès. Et pour vous dire, les endroits qui m'ont vraiment impressionné, touché, marqué, eh ben, c'est la basilique Sainte-Sophie, qui n'est pas une église aujourd'hui, qui est un musée, mais où j'ai été impressionné, agréablement surpris et touché de voir qu'il y a des références musulmanes et chrétiennes dans le même lieu. Cela m'a fait chaud au cœur et je trouve que c'est un exemple extraordinaire. Quand je vais à Delhi, je vais souvent dans le Lotus Temple. Le Lotus Temple où il y a vraiment une atmosphère de sérénité, de paix. Je retrouve là-bas au Lotus Temple où c'est vraiment très très beau, dans le marbre blanc et taillé comme une fleur de lotus.
Hassan Bugla, you have published a play in English and Creole, Bandari. The term Bandari refers to the chef who masters the art of cooking biryani. You write that Mauritius is the only country where the term Bandari is used.
First, let me say that the book is not about recipe. It's a deep sociological insight about a tradition, and it's also about the immaterial cultural heritage, which is under the threat of being evaded due to technological progress. I have written on Bandari because he is an artist. Biryani is a dish which is appreciated by all Mauritians. But very few people know who is the man behind. And he is known as Bhandari in Mauritius. And I have said it's true that it is the only place, Mauritius is the only place using the term Bhandari, because I have traveled throughout the subcontinent to India, to Pakistan, where it is, the term that is used is Khan Sama or Bawarji. Then I did some research. How come that in Mauritius we use this word Bhandari? When I was writing my book on Dr. Idris Kumani, it has a lot of interaction with the Lascars. The Lascars are Indian sailors who were brought here in Mauritius by Maïdela Boudonné. And in the glossary of the Lascars ships, because the ships were owned by the Europeans, and they employed Indian sailors whom they termed as Lascars. In their glossary, there was this word Bhandari. And Bhandari was responsible for cooking food for the Lascars, for the crew of the ship. And here comes the word Bhandari. And with the interaction, whenever the ships came to Port Louis, they interacted with the local people and they got this knowledge. And I must say that the Bhandari is not the only one who has transferred the knowledge of cooking biryani. There has been other sources, other influences, like Cockneys, like the traders, the trading community, they have brought their own cook from India or elsewhere. So I have tried through my book to pay a tribute to Bhandari, the one who is upholding certain cultural values.
What is the play about? The central character is a Bhandari, who is a strong advocate of traditional biryani.
Bhandari, he represents or he personifies a tradition which he inherited from his ancestors. And the knowledge, the traditional knowledge, has been passed on from father to son, generation to generation. Now, in the play, he comes at a stage, he's an old man, and he finds that he has no inheritor, he has no successor, and he is worried that after him, who is going to inherit that knowledge? And in my play, I have brought a young man. He is not part of his family, a young man. He is a handyman, a manev, and he wants to learn this secret of cooking biryani. And there is a kind of conflict between Bhandari and manev, a generational conflict. The Bhandari is very attached to his tradition, cooking biryani was under wood fire, with many of the hand operational, manual operation. Whereas a young man, he wants to do things differently. He wants to use modern technology, he wants to use Facebook, he wants to add some new ideas, okay, and which the Bhandari resists. And at the end, what will happen? I will leave it to the readers to see whether tradition will perpetuate or it is the young manev who is going to win at the end.
In your play, there is also a megalomaniac character, Tayo Razo, a political agent who thinks he can mobilize a large crowd to a political rally by luring them with a plate of biryani.
You know, I wanted to show in this play that biryani is a supreme dish, a royal dish. It has its etiquette, it has its own way of serving and eating. And I wanted to show that there is a tendency to make it a commercial commodity. And here I have introduced this idea of tayorazo, which in Creole you say taïraze. He, of course, he is a political agent, and you will find in all the popular manifestations, when there is a meeting of 1st May, all political parties try to woo their supporters by offering a plate of biryani. And this tayorazo, he personifies himself as someone who is not sincere to his boss. His mind is always on money. He looks biryani as a ordinary commodity just to buy people's conscience. And then you have also his secretary. He puts a kind of satire and criticizes some of the defects in the society. So this tayorazo, I wanted to bring the local color, where you find biryani on the street and used for other purpose than it was meant for.
As we have just seen, through human satire, the play highlights upon some social defects.
I have tried to point out some social defects, like many people today in Mauritius, even if they don't have means, they will organize big reception, big wedding, invite thousands and thousands of people. And you will see people coming, eating the biryani, they will wash their hand and they will go. There is no such kind of social interaction, no kind of intimacy. Even the host doesn't have time to receive his guests the way he wants. And people at times, they get themselves indebted to host such a big reception. So I have tried to put a kind of critique, a kind of satire, some kind of humor, how such kind of thing is happening. And also show that at times people, when they are eating biryani, they don't follow the etiquette. Biryani, when it was conceived by the wife of Emperor Jahangir, it was meant for a dish to bring people together. It was something grandiose, a grand banquet, bring people together. And in the Urdu words, they use jamaat, that is, bring people together. Here, the tendency is serving biryani on a takeaway. You invite him, at the end of the day, you don't have even time to serve your guest. You just give him a takeaway and he goes away. And at times they eat it alone instead of eating together. The spirit of sharing is no more there. So I wanted to bring those ideas of vivre ensemble, living together, the spirit of togetherness, which is being gradually, we are losing them. Another social defect is that, and I have pointed it out in my drama, is that today youngsters, when they are given a plate of good dish, a biryani, instead of focusing their attention on the dish, in relishing that good food, their eyes are scotched on the screen of their mobile phone, on the computer, and they even don't realize what they're eating. And at the end of the day, you will ask them, what have you eaten? Is it biryani or fried rice? At times they may even not know. Because the interaction is not there. The attention is not there. That vivre ensemble, that family atmosphere is not there. Everyone in his corner, watching football, watching his favorite program, or he's on WhatsApp, talking to his friends in United States and Europe. His mind is somewhere else, and he is eating the food mechanically. the world is becoming more robotic.
Narayan Jamnudoo, your book, Julie, a victim of drugs, relates the tragic story of Julie, a brilliant young girl who becomes a drug addict.
Well, she was a very brilliant young girl, always coming first in her class. Her parents always wanted her to become a doctor, and she was always obedient to her parents. And she was the pride of her teachers too. Her teachers always thought that she would become the first laureate of the college. But what happened? She fell into bad company. She met a young boy called Clifford. He was a playboy and a drug addict. And the boy got her drug, and that's why she became a drug addict, and she could not do without drugs. And she became a prostitute, and she neglected her studies, and later on she got AIDS.
As in such cases, the root of the problem is the bad company, mauvaise fréquentation. In this case, it is the meeting of Julie with Clifford, a playboy and drug addict.
She had a friend very close to her. She met her at the gymnasium, you know, and one day the lady asked a girl to come to the restaurant. She was going for lunch, and there the lady with her husband and Julie went there, and soon they saw Clifford coming, and Tony, the husband of the lady, said, "This is my cousin. I introduce you to Julie," you know, and they started talking with each other, and the boy gave her an appointment when she's going to meet her, and the girl fell for him, and from that time they start talking and they make the appointments, and they started out going out, and one day the boy took her to a restaurant, and soon she put some drugs in her glass without knowing what is happening, Julie knowing what is happening, and she drank the glass off, and from that time she could not live without drugs.
Is your story based on a real case?
No, it's a fiction, but the way I've written it, when you read the story, you find it it's real. Why? Because it's based on the facts happening every day in the events, you know. But you see the people talking about the children going to school, taking drugs. So that's a real fact. Why I've written, that has convinced me to write the book, to make the people aware, the parents aware what their children are doing.
My last question, why have you written this book?
The problem of drugs has become a daily issue. So I have written this book to make for the youngsters normally, you know, to make them to keep away from drugs, because they represent the future generation. Otherwise, our country will be doomed. They have to make the Mauritius progress to move forward, you know. That's why I've written this book. And it's not only the problem of the government, it's the problem of everyone trying to solve the problem. I want Mauritius to be a drug-free country. It could be if we are going to put our hands together. And the moral of the book is that life is a gift of God. We have to preserve it, not to destroy it.